It is the longest wait in sports between the regular season and when we see those teams compete in the playoffs, and much changes sometimes. And of course, the anticipation is through the roof for this one. Oklahoma and Alabama, one of the two national semifinals at the Orange Bowl. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, getting the Oklahoma side with Jason Rea from Last Word on College Football. Jason, hope you had a nice Christmas. How you doing?
Yeah, I had a great Christmas. Doing very good, Mark. How are you, sir?
I'm doing just fine. So we are just about 2.5 days away.
Right.
And of course, we kicked this one around a few weeks ago, but would like to get your latest thoughts, which starts with the latest news. So we talked about it before we started to record. At about this point last year, going into the Rose Bowl game against Georgia in the national semifinal, the big talk was Baker Mayfield and whether he would be at full strength and ready to go for the Georgia Bulldogs. Kyler Murray, maybe the situation not necessarily as severe, the diagnosis not as firm, but feeling under the weather. And if you could update us on his progress, and also, of course, Marquise Brown, who's been hobbled up since the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. I think there was a little bit of yesterday morning when the news came out that Kyler was going to skip the media session, the first media session at the Orange Bowl. I think there was a little bit of panic from Sooner Nation because it was really kind of a bad deja vu feeling from last year, as you mentioned, when Baker had the flu leading up. His was a little bit earlier, I think, in the bowl process. I think it was about a week leading up to the game where he had the flu, up until a couple of days before the game itself. This one's a little bit different, I think, in the fact that he just mentioned that he told the Sooner staff that he wasn't feeling well the night before the original media session was set to kick off. So he skipped that. The good news for Oklahoma fans is that he was at practice that afternoon. He mentioned he still didn't feel well, but he felt better than he did the previous night or that earlier that morning. But obviously felt it was important to do as much as he could with the guys, and all indications are he is better. Maybe it's just a little bit of a head cold or something like that. It doesn't seem to be anywhere near as severe as with Baker Mayfield last year. Now, kind of on the other side, on the Marquise Hollywood Brown story, apparently he broke a bone in his foot. I think it was in the third quarter of the Big 12 championship game against Texas. I think after that injury, I think a lot of people thought there's no way he would be ready for the Orange Bowl, but he has rehabbed that pretty well. He's been, you've seen some social media photos of him working out on the beach in Miami. He actually went through full practice. I think the media got the first 15 minutes was open to the media yesterday, where he looked like he was pretty much a full go. So I think Riley's kind of been a little bit coy with that. I think earlier this morning when he met with the media, his response was just, "We'll see. We'll see if he's ready." So obviously something that he probably doesn't want to give full indication, yay or nay, to Alabama right now, whether or not he's going to play. But I would certainly anticipate him at least being out there. Now, whether or not he's 100%, that's a different story. But I would definitely anticipate him being out there.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Orange Bowl national semifinal game between Alabama and Oklahoma, just about 2.5 days away, with Kyler Murray's health somewhat in question. This brings into play both quarterbacks' situation. Tua Tagovailoa, of course, with the ankle injury stemming back to the SEC championship game, and actually some lower leg problems earlier in the season as well that have been kind of lingering. How do you think that has possibly affected the preparation for the OU defense, considering Tua a much different quarterback? They're both mobile to a certain extent. They're not Kyler Murray mobile, but they're mobile, both Hurts and Tagovailoa. But of course, Tua presents that downfield passing game, but Jalen Hurts obviously very accomplished. So if Saban's not completely comfortable with one, especially the way Jalen Hurts played in the SEC championship game comeback against Georgia, it gives the OU defense and defensive coordinator a lot to think about there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you have to go into the game preparing for both. I think even with Tua being 100%, I wouldn't be surprised if he is 100%. Wouldn't be surprised to see Jalen Hurts in there, whether it be situational or at all. So you're absolutely right. Certainly you have to prepare for both offenses. I mean, to your point, Mark, Tua has he's not as much of a runner as Jalen Hurts is, where he will kind of beat you down, kind of down the field. Where Hurts is a much better runner, as we saw in the SEC championship game there in the fourth quarter. But maybe not quite as accurate down the field. But I think it's much more difficult to have two different game plans. So I think the game plans will probably be very similar, but certainly with Jalen Hurts in there, you have to play it a little differently. I think when you look at Jalen Hurts' game, it's the offense would probably look a little bit more like Texas, which Oklahoma's faced a couple of times with Ellinger and Hurts are very similar. Both very good runners. Both are good passers, good throwers of the football if you give them the opportunity. But they're better at scrambling and running the ball. And Oklahoma held Ellinger down pretty well in the Big 12 championship game. So certainly the Sooners, it's been very much maligned defense this year, but they did play slightly better against Texas in the second, particularly in the second half. So I think that gives them a little bit of momentum coming into this game for sure.
And you raise your eyebrows, and I know what you mean there when you talk about they played slightly better against Texas. It wasn't a scintillating defensive stifling effort, but at the same time, I watched the game. I watched every play of that game, and if we just took that game in a vacuum and said, check out this defense against Texas, how well did it play? They actually played a pretty darn good football game, considering the style of play on offense, how quickly they turned the ball over, whether it be 3 and outs or scores, and giving the ball back to the opponent. That always has to be taken into consideration. Yes, the Oklahoma defense is not good, but they're on the field a lot. They have to, make up for the offense, either scoring in a $1.45 or in turning the ball over on 3 and outs and whatever in about a $1.45. So it's going to be quick regardless most of the time. And they're out there and they made plays as they did against West Virginia, but that was a horrendous defensive effort. They just made the two game-changing plays to their credit. On the flip side, they played well against Texas in the second half, almost gave it up in the final drive, but picked off a pass down in the end zone that would have given Texas an opportunity, of course, with the onside kick. But so that's the one side of the football, Bama offense versus OU defense. It seems to be about a given. Now, it'll be interesting if it turns out to be something different than Bama can just do whatever they want and score 55 to 60 points, or they'll be able to do whatever they want, but OU is going to make like 3 plays that are going to be big. Pick six, strip sack, fumble that limits Alabama to more like 38 points, and now Oklahoma will have done its job. The intriguing matchup, of course, is the Bama defense against the OU offense. We're talking about two of the great units in college football, and I guess the argument for the OU offense is that Bama's never seen anything like them. The argument for the Bama defense is, wow, they can take on teams in the SEC that are nowhere close to the explosiveness of OU, but still SEC athletes, guys going to the pros all over the field, and they shut out Mississippi State and LSU, that this Alabama defense is this good. So it's fascinating, that matchup, in terms of what's going to actually play out on the field.
Yeah, Mark, you're absolutely right. That's certainly the more fascinating matchup, and I think it kind of goes back to the whole Big 12 versus SEC mindset, right? Certainly you have the better defensive players, the better athletes, the better defenses in general in the SEC, whereas the Big 12 is just kind of known as the old WAC conference, right? The old just throw it around, see how many points you can score. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two schools of thought on this, right, Mark? You got Oklahoma, which they certainly haven't faced anybody that has the level of defense, the level of athletes, particularly up front, than what Alabama has. I think one of the big matchups to watch will be how the Oklahoma offensive line, which is to many people is regarded as the best offensive line in the country, how do they hold up against Quentin Williams and company on the defensive line. I think having a balanced attack, a balanced attack for Oklahoma in this game is going to be very pivotal for them to have success. Last year against Georgia, who was one of the best defenses in the country, I think the speed and the athleticism and just the power and the strength that Oklahoma had on the offense kind of surprised them at first. They scored, I think it was 27, 31 points in the first half, and I think Georgia adjusted a little bit in the second half. But I think the how those adjustments kind of play themselves out a little bit will be interesting, specifically in the third and fourth quarter. I think, Riley has a little bit. I mean, the one knock, and it's hard to knock a guy that's, in his first 2 years has lost 2 games. But the one knock that Riley has is he does take his foot off the gas pedal a little bit at times. You noticed that in the Rose Bowl last year. In the third quarter, they kind of went a little bit conservative, and then found themselves back in the ball game. Then he had to put his foot back on the pedal with that. So I think the key is for on both sides of the ball, but particularly on offense, for this matchup, is for Oklahoma to be very very aggressive for 4 quarters. I think the health of Marquise Brown is going to be very pivotal to that success. If he's somewhere near 100%, he's the big time, big play, deep threat that can spread the field and kind of keep the defense honest. If he's not able to go, or if he's not successful, you can see he's not he's not 100%. He can't stretch the field, where that plays into the hands of Alabama, because Oklahoma doesn't really have another big play deep threat. CeeDee Lamb is more kind of a possession receiver type guy. He does have the ability to stretch the field, but not in the same manner that Marquise Brown does. So I think that, along with being balanced. Well, Rodney Anderson ran for over 200 yards last year against Georgia. Should Oklahoma have a running back that runs over 200 yards against Alabama, you would have to like Oklahoma's chances in that facet.
Jason, you went to the obvious example of the Rose Bowl game against Georgia and facing an elite defense. I quickly thought I bypassed actually in my mind until you went the obvious route. Obviously, I went to the Ohio State game early in the season in Columbus, which was kind of an odd game where Oklahoma won 31-16. But the way the game played out was, and people will check me on this, I know I'm going to get comments in the comment section that Ohio State doesn't have an elite defense. Well, that defense was elite. Look at all the statistics. They were a top 5 defense across the board. Yes, they faltered this year, but we're going back to 2017. Ohio State was elite on defense, both from an NFL caliber standpoint of athletes and then also the production on the field. And that was kind of an odd game in which Baker threw for like 365. They moved the ball between the 20s, but Ohio State made a ton of plays and held them down. It was like a 10-9 game early in the fourth quarter. And then it was actually the Ohio State offense that kept turning the ball over and just going 3 and out, and couldn't move against the OU defense, surprisingly, that broke the game open from a score perspective to 31 points. So that's also a kind of an example of the OU offense against an elite defense as well that came to mind.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think one of the keys to this game, really on both sides of the ball, because both Alabama and Oklahoma are very, very quick strike offenses this year. I think Alabama has the 5 top receivers average over 17 yards per catch. Oklahoma has CD and Marquise that average that as well. But I think the quick strike is going to be key in this game. Typically, quick strike offenses don't like to consistently have to go 70, 80, 85 yards down the field in a methodical, 9, 10, 11 play drive for a majority of the game. So I think that, that the defense, obviously Alabama is a much more equipped to force Oklahoma to go the length of the field in a longer drive as with Oklahoma's defense. But certainly I think that's going to be one of the keys to this game is which defense can essentially impose their will on the other side and make that other team go the length of the field in large numbers of plays without going, the big chunk plays for touchdowns to get the other defense back on the field.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, bringing in Jason Rea from Last Word on College Football. He covers Oklahoma in particular, of course, the Sooners with one of their biggest games in recent memory, taking on Alabama. The Sooners have become a mainstay of the college football playoff with 3 of 5 appearances, and of course, Alabama making the field each and every year. And the last time that these two schools met was, of course, in the 2013-2014 Sugar Bowl after the 2013 season. Alabama, a big 2-touchdown favorite. deja vu possibly. And Trevor Knight and company took care of them. I remember Eric Stryker having a big game on defense, and really the DNs of Oklahoma really giving A.J. McCarron fits in that game as Alabama was upset like 45-31 by a couple touchdowns in that game. It was a really good game, but Oklahoma really looked sharp and shocking most of us because I didn't see that coming. Amari Cooper and company, and typically star-studded Alabama offense and defense in that one. So the spread, again, is 14 points, Jason. And the quick analysis, the surface analysis is, to me, Oklahoma's offense is here, Alabama's is here. In terms of productivity, maybe Oklahoma's is a little bit better. And I think the one difference in the two offenses, the obvious difference is Kyler Murray's a more dynamic running quarterback than what Alabama has, although they're certainly not hurting in the mobile quarterback standpoint. The offensive lines are comparable. Alabama may have, I think there's no question, they have more NFL talented wide receiver, but in terms of productivity, they're very close. Oklahoma may be a tad more explosive with Hollywood on the field. The defenses are obviously, this is where you've got a top 5 defense against like a top 70 defense in the country. And I'm not looking at the stats and the metrics, but just the realistic viewpoint of these two defenses. And that's where I see the 14-point spread, and most people do. So how do we make the case for Oklahoma in this one?
It's a difficult case to make. I mean, I don't think there's any illusions out there that Oklahoma's going to be able to stop Alabama on the defensive side of the ball. That's I mean, you're not gonna change who you are in 3 weeks. So I think what Oklahoma has to do is they have to be creative. They have to be at all levels of the defense. They typically after Ruffin McNeil has taken over for Mike Stoops early in the year after the first Texas game, Oklahoma moved more to a 4-man line on the defensive side of the ball. I think the Sooners will have to be multiples, kind of switching, interchanging between that 4-man and 3-man line. I think that Oklahoma will also have to be very exotic on how they get pressure onto it. I think you got to, if you're if you're looking at this from the outside looking in as the Sooners kind of prepare and what the game plan looks like, you have to be in a position where you kind of try to put some pressure onto it early in the game, kind of test that ankle, look and see what his mobility is. Is he 100%? Is he close to it? Is he just hobbling? Is he back there as he throws? So I think getting pressure is certainly key, just to understanding where he's at as far as his health goes, and Oklahoma has to win the turnover battle. I think one of my keys to the game was Oklahoma has to be at least +2 in the turnover battle, if not +3. I think one of the you talked about the 2014 Sugar Bowl in which Oklahoma beat Alabama 45-31. Kind of say what you will. I think from an Alabama perspective, I think maybe they didn't have the same emotion, the same motivation going into that game that Oklahoma did. Just after that pick six loss or the kick six loss, I'm sorry, to Auburn. But Oklahoma was able to force 5 turnovers in that game. They still gave up over 500 yards and 31 points. But the 2 interceptions and I think the 3 fumbles that they caused was key. And Oklahoma only turned the ball over 1 time, so they had that +4 advantage. So Oklahoma is certainly not going to stop Alabama. They are very, very good at the skill positions. Both at the receiver and running back, and obviously Tua being second in the Heisman. I think what you saw in the SEC championship game was something that Oklahoma they don't have the same athletes that Georgia has. They don't have the same athletes. They don't have the same talent on the defensive side of the ball. But what Oklahoma can do is try to be multiple, come at Tua from different angles, from blitz packages, from stunts up front, and just try to get some pressure, because for as good as Tua is, he is a bit of a gunslinger. He does. You notice that in the Georgia game when they got some pressure on him up front, he did make some poor decisions. So Oklahoma just has to be in a position to just give them multiple looks and just try to force any mistakes that you can.